Welcome to Go a Little Mad, a horror movie podcast. My name is Jason, and I love scary movies.
I'm Brianna, and I don't. And this week, we're discussing It Follows.
You said that ominously.
Well, it's very it's very ominous.
I used to daydream about being old enough to go on dates. I had this image of myself holding hands with a really cute guy, driving along some pretty road. It was never about going anywhere, really. It was having some sort of freedom, I guess.
Jay, you awake? You're not gonna believe me. I need you to remember what I'm saying. This thing, it's gonna follow you. Somebody gave it to me, and I passed it to you. Wherever you are, it's somewhere walking straight for you. All you can do is pass it along to someone else. It could look like someone you know, or it could be a stranger in a crowd. Whatever helps it get close to you.
It Follows was written and directed by David Robert Mitchell. It stars Maika Monroe. I meant to look up these people's names on how to say them because there's a lot of unique names here. Maika Monroe as Jay, Keir Gilchrist as Paul, Olivia Lucarati as Yara, Lily Seppi as Kelly, and Daniel Zavato as Greg.
And that really is like the whole cast. There's like 3 other people in this whole movie, I feel like.
Yeah. A synopsis for the movie. Jay, a woman in her early 20s, maybe? ?
She's in high school.
No, she's drinking alcohol later.
Yeah, high school kids don't drink.
At a restaurant.
She's in high school. She leaves class in the middle of school. And the kid that...
I thought that was college.
And the kid that they chased down, he also is in high school.
I thought he was in college.
No, they say the name of the school. It's a high school. They're both in high school. 100%.
Then what's the age of everybody else?
So I always, I assume Jay's like 17, and so is Paul. And then Kelly and Yara are like 15, 16. Like Irish twins, maybe, but maybe even a year younger.
Oh, that just makes this whole thing worse. Okay. Well, she has sex with a guy who passes on something worse than an STD, but something demonic and relentless that is always lurking or following behind her.
If you want a synopsis in, a very short one, just like sexually transmitted ghost. It's an STG. That's the plot of this movie.
That is worse than an STD or STI, whatever they're called now. Okay, so just a little bit more on the synopsis of this. So the director, David Robert Mitchell, said that the concept is, quote, one of those things that if you say it the wrong way or read it on paper, it could sound a little silly. And I do have to agree.
Oh, he's absolutely right, yeah. But, that said, it is certainly one of the most original horror movies of the 2000s, at the very least, in an age where we're doing reboots, remakes, sequels, et cetera, This was a very original movie, and I do remember, even at the time, that stood out to me, and it holds up.
Speaking of it being original, what is the Rotten Tomatoes score?
96%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. People really like this, and I think a big part of that is the originality, because, you look at the script, you look at the cast, they're good, but it's not, like, incredible. Like, there are no performances here that are going to blow you away. There's no like, scenes where you're like, oh my God, that was so well done. It's just very original and solidly executed, and I think you get a lot of points for originality here.
How about your flesh wounds?
So, the first one, when we were watching this movie, I didn't really think of it at the time because it wasn't such a big part of internet culture at the time, but this made me think of a meme that's been circulating for the last several years. And I don't know if you've heard this or not, or if we've talked about it at any point. But basically the premise is this. You get $10 million. However, for the rest of your life, you are followed by a snail. If that snail touches you, you die.
Oh, no.
It goes snail speed all the time, but it is immortal. You cannot kill it, hurt it, or stop it in any way. So do you take the money? And if you do, what's your strategy to avoid the snail?
Okay. Well, I like snail pace. That is famously slow, which is a good thing.
Famously.
Yeah. How much is it? 10 million?
10 million. So this is 7 years ago. So 10 million back then with the current inflation, that's like $1 billion today.
Exactly.
But,
yeah. So, I mean, I want to say yes because it just sounds so simple. A snail. But after watching this movie, I have to say no.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. I will say I'd probably do it. The most common strategy, I mean, it seems to be, you figure out how long it takes the snail to like cross the ocean. Mm-hmm. And then you just maintain a residence in, say, England and a residence in America. And you just fly back and forth every like 3-4
that's
months.
Smart. Also, could you just like trap it under a cup?
No, you cannot trap it or stop it or slow it down in any way.
Okay.
Yeah, good thinking, though.
Okay.
But, I mean, it is a snail, so you could let it get within 10 feet of you and then just, like, leap over it and run the other direction.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not quite as menacing as this, but...
That's true.
So, anyway, you can see the similarities between
Yes.
the monster in this movie, which never runs, it just chases you, and it just walks, and it just has to follow normal rules, but you can't really stop it, you can't slow it down. So it got me thinking, which came first? I did some research, and the meme originated on a podcast called Rooster Teeth, which I've heard of, but I was never really a listener of, so I didn't know that. An episode that aired on August 26th, 2014. So when did It Follows come out? May 2014.
Okay, wait. When did the podcast do the episode?
August, several months after this movie
okay,
premiered.
okay.
So I listened to it. I pulled up that episode of the podcast. I just listened to their initial conversation. They didn't mention the movie at all. It had nothing to do with the movie. They were talking about snails, and one of them just thought it was funny because snails are slow. But you wonder if they had seen the movie a few months ago and maybe that's what put it in their brain or what.
Yeah.
But they never mention it. Nothing like that. This might just be one of those convergent development things, like Angel Has Fallen and White House Down.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, honestly, it's like the same premise, except instead of $10 million, you get sex once with a high school boy who probably isn't good.
Yeah, and just only bad things.
Yeah.
Only bad things.
So the snail offer is a little more enticing.
At least I can afford, my 2 living spaces. Maybe.
So the next little fun fact is I'm going to cite Andy Hogland and a blog post he made on Huffington Post titled References in It Follows Set the Tone. I went looking for this because as we were watching this, there were a couple scenes where the kids are watching like old sci-fi movies, like 50 sci-fi movies on the TV. And I made a note to myself to look that up to see if there was anything interesting there. Not so much. There are a couple of 50 sci-fi movies called Killers from Space and The Giant Claw. But I found something that was very interesting. In the beginning, Jay goes to the movies with Hugh before they have sex. They don't end up staying, and you don't see much or any of the movie on the screen, which I think is why it slipped my mind initially. But the movie they were supposed to see is a 1963 film starring Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn called Charade. Or Charade?
Charade, it's fancier.
Yeah, fancy. It's got a pretty, like, twisty Hitchcockian plot, so, I won't go into the full details here, but the gist of it is that in the movie, Audrey Hepburn finds out that both her soon-to-be ex-husband and this charming new guy that she's met are not who they claim to be, and getting involved with them has gotten her into a bunch of trouble.
Ooh.
So that's basically David Robert Mitchell just telegraphing what's about to happen to Jay, because Hugh is not who he says he is, and getting involved with him gets her ghost disease.
That's fun.
Yeah, I thought that was really neat. Low on quantity today, but heavy on quality. I feel good about those two.
Yeah. I have no touch points because I had never even heard of this film. So what about you?
Really, you'd never even heard of it?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I remember this very vividly because I saw the trailer in the theater. I don't remember what movie I was seeing when I saw the trailer, but immediately I was like, that looks awesome. Like, I am all about this movie. I ended up seeing it at the movie theater in Southington, down the road from where I grew up with my friend Genesia, who I saw a lot of horror movies with around that time. I think Sinister was one that we had seen together. I remember walking out of the theater and just loving it and immediately saying, like, that's one of the best soundtracks I'd ever heard in a horror movie, which held up when we were watching it today, or, last week.
Yeah. Okay, so what did you think of the overall, before we get into the whole plot of it, what did you think of the tone or message or anything to this movie?
The message?
Not the message, I guess. There's no message except for what I perceived. But what did you think of like the tone of this?
I mean, it was just it's very dreamlike, this movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of we talked about this I think a little bit even as we were watching it. There are a lot of things in there that are similar to today, modern society, but then there are other things that aren't, you know? So, like, we see them driving modern cars, but we also see them driving a lot of older cars. They've got these old CRT TVs, but, like, one of them's got this little clamshell cell phone thing. So there are a lot of things that kind of make you feel like it's like one of those pictures that you look at that looks normal, but the more you look at it, you see things that are wrong with it.
Yeah.
So that's what this felt like to me. It's just it's like you're in a dream where everything is kind of real, but the more you look underneath the surface, the weirder it gets.
So that was intentional, and I'm going to talk about that at a different point. But I looked at this as like, did you ever read Go Ask Alice?
I did not.
Okay, I think that was a thing only girls read. But at the time, every like millennial girl has read Go Ask Alice, and I think we all thought it was real because it was like written by anonymous and it was very mysterious. But it's not real. I think it might be some kind of religious propaganda at the end of the day, but ultimately it's just like this tall tale of kind of like warning of how a girl should act. And that's kind of how I felt this film was, just a little tiny bit. And I think it was because I'm like a woman watching this movie about sex and consequences around sex. It's also something that could easily become urban legend, which I feel like touches on the dreamlike state of everything. But it's suggesting that if you don't choose your sexual partners carefully, there are grave consequences, which is just very after school special.
Well, you know, it's interesting hearing this from someone who isn't a horror fan, because maybe you aren't kind of as tuned into this sort of thing, but a lot of the old school slashers, the 80s slashers, especially Friday the 13th, were basically an after school special where these teenagers, as soon as they had sex, got viciously murdered. Yeah. And so, you know, when I'm watching this movie, I'm kind of seeing it as that's like a little wink to horror past, horror culture. Whereas, you know, those movies were made with that Go Ask Alice mindset. Yeah. Like, we need to teach these kids they can't have sex. But I viewed this as, you know, more of a nod to that. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying you're wrong. But I think that you being a woman and me being a horror fan have given us just two very different lenses to view this through.
They also have this whole kind of thing with like, she's got like a messed up family. She's the weird family in the neighborhood. Like, there's lots of moments of people just watching them being like, oh my God, they're a mess. But the director said, I certainly don't mean that like a morality on it. He doesn't mean for that to come across. And I don't think it has a puritanical message, but I like that people read the film in different ways. For me in the film, so this is still quoting him, for me in the film, sex is the thing that opens people up to this danger, but the truth is it's also the thing that can release them, at least temporarily, so it's not that simple. But I really just think that just kind of shows that this was written by a man, because there's like always morality tied to sex for women. Not always, but especially when they're teenagers and coming of age.
No,
and
I know,
like,
but I just don't understand that viewpoint is not exclusive to men. I don't think him being a man has anything to do with that viewpoint. I think.
Well, what I mean by that is that he maybe didn't. High school boys don't have morality tied to sex as much as girls do, is what I mean.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, so that's why when he was asked about this in the interview, he was kind of like, well, no, because it just doesn't. But all this girl does is suffer because she had sex, like, apparently in high school, even though I thought she was 21.
Right, but I mean, so does Greg.
Yeah. But we don't see the weight of it on him because he doesn't even believe in it, which we get to later. We see the weight on the girl the whole time.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, shall we begin?
Yeah.
So we begin on an empty street. It's kind of fallish looking. It's a regular neighborhood. Birds are chirping. We focus on a brick house, and a girl eventually runs out, seemingly like she's escaping from something. She's wearing like a silky tank and shorts and red heels. This is not an outfit one intentionally leaves the house in. And as she runs into the street, she kind of stops and turns back around. A neighbor asks if she's okay, and she's clearly not, but she says she's fine. Then she runs in like a half circle, kind of, as though she's running around something, and then meets her dad at the house, who's like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "It's fine." And she runs back inside with him. Moments later, she comes back out, gets in the car, and drives away. Initially, this is all very confusing, but we'll kind of come back to this scene and explain what's happening as we learn what happens. The scene stuck with me through the whole movie because I kept trying to figure out, like, what does this mean? And then once you realize what it means, it's like, whoa. So I have an appreciation for this scene. And there's also kind of small moments of nothing. Like when she and her dad go into the home, we just kind of stick on this house. They do a good job of creating like a nice little neighborhood, but we know something is not okay here, even though we don't know what's going on. And that's right away. She drives to the beach. It's night. And by the way, it took me forever. I thought the beach this whole time was the ocean. We keep seeing a beach throughout. It's just one of the Great Lakes, right?
Yeah, it's whatever one Detroit is on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Later we find out they're in Detroit, and I was like, this has been a lake the entire time. It's a really big lake.
Fast forward, like, I forgot that it was set in Detroit. So there are, like, several moments when they're driving through the city and it looks like trash. And I'm, like, writing notes like, they must be in Detroit. Ha, ha, ha.
Oh my God.
Turns out they're in Detroit. So sorry in advance
Sorry,
to anybody
Detroit.
That's listening to us from Detroit. Not that there are.
So she drives to the beach. It's night. The shot is initially looking at her from the car, which I thought was a really pretty shot. I was like, wow, this is so nice, the beach, except for the impending doom. Her phone rings and it's her dad, and she's, very clearly saying goodbye to them without just saying goodbye. As she's talking, she looks out into the road from where she drove in, and she's very afraid, even though there's nothing there, which is like my least favorite thing that people do in horror movies is look in fear where there is nothing, because I am simply waiting for the thing to come.
Cats do that too.
Oh, I hate that. Cut to the morning, and she is grotesquely dead on the beach.
Yeah, so a couple things about this opening scene. One, it's a great opening scene, and I as I've been like writing these notes and watching these movies and doing this podcast, I've kind of realized that most great horror movies start with a really good tone-setting opening scene. And I feel like it's just, if a movie starts, it's just kind of like, okay, it could be a good movie, could be a bad movie, but generally if a movie opens on a really good scene, it's going to be a really good movie. That's just a trend I've noticed. The second is starting back on the street before she even goes back in the house, the music kicks in.
Yeah.
And like the chase music for this monster is consistent throughout. They play like this same theme every time the monster is chasing somebody.
Do they really?
They
same theme?
Mm-hmm.
I never noticed similarities.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
And it's very simple synthesizer. It's like if the Halloween theme were done on like in a pop synth style. It's very simple but very effective. It's just ominous. It's just lots of like deep tones and fear, and I love it. Yeah,
you've talked about the music in the past, and so I was specifically waiting to like hear that and listen to it. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, okay, I get it. This is weird. This is different. It's not music. It's like sounds.
Yeah, it's really good. So I just love that right off the bat. I'm like, yes, that's right. This music is great. And then as for the kill itself, this is, I would say, the goriest part of the movie.
Yes.
Which there are some other gory parts, but this is the goriest part of the movie. So to set like the picture, she's laying on her back, but her legs are like straight up in the air, but her knee is bent back the other way, forming kind of like a backwards C. Ooh. It's pretty rough. It's like Joe Theismann or Alex Smith for our younger NFL fans. It's pretty gross, and it was definitely the first time I saw the movie, I was like, oh god, this is going to be so gross, but it was not that gross for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, also her other foot was cut off.
Oh, was it? I didn't notice. See, I'm fixated on that knee. Ugh.
Yeah. Back to another neighborhood, we look at Jay floating in the pool. Her sister Kelly comes out to tell her that some friends are coming over. Jay says she's going out with a guy, and as she leaves the pool, two boys are peering at her through the fence, and she smirks.
Well, we've all been there, trying to get a look at some older teenage boobies. I will say, while Jay's in the pool, there's like this weird part where she's like, you see an ant crawl on her arm.
Yeah.
And then she submerges her arm and watches the ant drown. That's pretty messed up.
Yeah, dark.
Yeah.
Inside, Kelly and the two friends, Paul and Yara, are on the couch. Their mom is at a table on the phone, and they're watching an old black and white movie on a very old television. And Yara is holding a Seashell compact that is open to like a digital screen. So it's a phone.
She-shell cell phone? Seashell cell phone? Seashell cell phone.
Yes. So this is what you mentioned kind of at the beginning about dream-like time, what is time kind of thing. So throughout the film, they do play with time pretty much wherever they could with cars, appliances. I would say the look of the characters, because at least for me, they change age throughout the film. Especially when we see Greg later. Greg has like this like Johnny Depp look sometimes, and then he's 12 later. It's very confusing.
Yeah, certain angles just make his face look rounder, and when it looks rounder, it's very boyish.
Yes.
Yeah.
The director said this was intentional to, quote, put the film a little bit outside of time so it's closer to a dream. And speaking of that, the premise of this film came to him from a dream that he had, like a recurring dream of someone following him in the same way that the It's follow the people.
Is that a dream or a nightmare?
Exactly. Jay gets ready. She puts on like a pink dress and tall boots. She takes some medication and she stares at herself in the mirror. There's an old TV in her room as well. Standing in line to get movie tickets, Jay talks to Hugh, so this is her date, about a game she and her sister used to play, or they do play, where they pick a person in the crowd that they want to trade places with, and the other has to guess who they picked and why.
Okay, before we get into the game, I just have to say, Hugh looks like a total douche. He's got this like chin strap beard right there.
Yeah.
Giant red flag.
He's pacey.
Like, I try very hard not to judge people based on their appearance, but like he looks like Joshua Jackson playing a domestic abuser. It's just I couldn't, like, if you introduced me to this guy, you're like, oh, I used to date this guy, immediately, this guy, was he a douche? He looks like a douche.
He looks like a 90s lesser heartthrob. Like, he's not Nick Carter level. He's who is it? Joshua Jackson?
Joshua Jackson,
yeah. Or like Zachary Ty Bryan level. That's where he's at.
Zachary Ty Bryan was a heartthrob?
He's B-level heartthrob. Well, JTT was A-level.
Obviously.
And then it was him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I had him on my wall for some reason. At one point, I had all of them on my wall until I just went Backstreet Boys.
Even the young goth kid?
No.
Oh.
He never became a heartthrob.
Oh, okay.
The youngest brother in Home Improvement, for all of those who don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, in the later seasons, he goes through like a goth phase. It's fun.
It's unnecessary. Basically, he goes first. No, she goes first. No, he goes first. He goes first.
Yes.
And they get two guesses. So she misses twice, and he tells her who it is. He picked out this 5-year-old kid in the crowd. And the reason why was because he has his whole life in front of him, and he gets to go to the bathroom whenever he wants. This kid was definitely potty trained. And the insinuation here is that he is wearing a diaper, but he was absolutely potty trained. And also, don't adults most of the time just get to go to the bathroom whenever they want anyway? Like, what's the deal here?
I think you're reading too much into it. I think it was more about the life being way ahead of him
I
part
know.
as Hugh was staring at his impending death. And that was more just like a funny throw in because, like, oh my God, I almost just told this girl I just started dating that I feel like I'm near the end of my life. So I better make a weird joke about pooping my pants so she'll laugh and this won't get weird.
Well, he nailed it.
Wouldn't have worked on you, though, apparently.
In the theater, they're waiting for the movie to start, so she picks somebody. He looks around and, he's like, is it the woman in the yellow dress? And he's pointing to, the doorway, the entrance into the theater. And she's like, there's no one there. And he's like, right there in the yellow dress. And she's like, there's nobody there. And then all of a sudden, he feels sick and they have to leave. They drive, and the music I wrote is bing bong. So those are the kind of sounds that we're experiencing in the music. Because that's what I wrote, so that must be right.
Okay.
They go to dinner, and all seems well, except he didn't feel well, so I don't know why they went to dinner. But at the table, she bends over to take a sip of her drink that is filled to the brim that is definitely a martini glass. So she is drinking alcohol at a restaurant. I guess in Detroit, they just don't care.
Yeah, high school kids have never, obtained fake IDs.
Oh my God, I'm telling you, she is in college.
They talk about high school. They talk about it.
Because her sister's in high school.
So she's dating a high school kid, though?
No, he graduated, and they went back to find out about him. This will be the end of our relationship. I will die on this hill.
All right, you might be right. You might be right. I thought he was a student at that high school, but I think you're right. He did graduate. So, yeah, you could be right. All right, I'll back down.
Crazy.
I'm sorry. No, I'll back down. No need to die on the hill.
Okay, but so she bends over to like take a sip of the drink without picking up the glass because it's filled up so much. And they're sitting by a window and the camera focuses on just someone walking outside. And that's it. Nothing weird, nothing descriptive about the person, but I was like, why are we doing this? And then we just move on. Oh, we'll find out why we're doing this. Cut to the daytime with Jay and her sister. They're just strolling down the sidewalk. Her sister's smoking, and they're just kind of catching up about like the date and whatever else. Later, she and Hugh are walking through woods at night. And then they're on the shore. They're like making out, and she suggests they go back to the car. Speaking of the car, he has a very old car. Lots of breathing as they have sex, and that was because there is no music. So there was just no synthesizing music to put to a sex scene, so they just didn't, which is rare. I feel like most sex scenes have music. This is where I realized he looked like Pacey, by the way. I kept staring at him, and I was like, who is this? And I was like, it's Pacey. They finish, and he gets out of the car, and he goes to the trunk. Now, I'm hearing a lot of clanging while he's back there.
Yeah, you're getting very stressed at this point. You're like...
Because immediately no.
Yeah, you're like, what's happening? Is he killing her?
Yeah.
In that exact tone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because who has sex and then just gets out of the car and goes to the trunk? What are you doing? And who doesn't wonder what you're doing? I would also be getting out of the car and being like, what are you doing?
It's probably going to get a towel, Brianna.
Instead, she just lays on her stomach and picks at the grass and weeds. And she says, like, I don't even know what she's talking about. It's very 90s, early 2000s coming of age film blather that she's just going on about. Which, by the way, is like the entire kind of first section of this film is very 90s turning of age film. It's almost like two separate movies to me. Like the beginning is this, and then this scene pretty much shifts the movie now to a horror movie for the rest of it.
That's interesting because it never felt that way to me. Maybe because going into it, I knew what I was like kind of signing up for. But
yeah.
I've never felt that contrast.
There's just so many conversations about that their family is messed up, but like we don't really know why. And there's conversations with almost no details, but it just gives me that vibe. He comes back into the car through the back seat and covers her mouth with a cloth until she passes out. Next, she's tied to a wheelchair in an abandoned warehouse, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's
right there, but...
that's where they were having sex, just in the car outside that
Yeah,
building.
it's just like very open, like a parking garage, but the warehouse, it was confusing, so... Pacey is like pacing with a flashlight, waiting for someone to arrive, and she starts moving around, and he calls out to her and tries to assure her that he's not going to hurt her. Well, he already did, probably. That's why he's saying that.
Well, how did he hurt her?
By cursing her.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
He says, you're not going to believe me, but remember what I'm saying. This thing, it's going to follow you. Someone gave it to me, and I passed it on to you. It could look like someone you know or a stranger in the crowd. Then he says that he sees it from across the train tracks is someone approaching. It's a naked girl. So he wheeled her out so she could see that, and he wheels her back.
And I have to say, during this whole ordeal, Hugh sounds very sincere. He sounds scared. He sounds like this is the most sympathetic I'd probably ever feel for a guy who just drugged and tied up an innocent woman.
Right. He doesn't sound like a predator.
No, he sounds, you believe him. You don't think
Yeah.
he's like a schizophrenic.
He wheels her back and tells her that she can get rid of it just by sleeping with someone else as fast as she can. But if she dies, it'll return to him. And this is where I wrote, is this an allegory for STDs?
I'm going to say no, because his syphilis is going to kill him either way. Just saying.
Right. He's rushing them back to the car, telling her to never be somewhere with only one exit. It's very slow, but not dumb. And he also tells her not to let it touch her. The rules branded onto me at this point. I was like, I like these rules. I appreciate these rules. I can work within these rules. It's okay. We can work with this.
You get the sense over the course of this movie when, like, they investigate Hugh and see more about him, that he, like, I don't know if he was just really bad at, like, picking up women, because it seemed like he knew a lot about this, when they find, like, that house he was staying in, and, so it seems like he knew a lot, and he'd really put a lot of thought into the defense of this.
Well, and that's one of the issues with this whole thing is you can just have sex with as many people as you want, and that person can pass it and pass it and pass it and pass it and pass it, but it can still always come back to you.
Yeah, you're never totally safe.
And that could be 10 years. It could be 5 days.
Yeah, that's the real horror of this.
Back at the house, Kelly, Paul, and Yara are out in the front yard playing cards, and they're talking about how Jay is, like, out with a new guy, how it's always someone new, and how annoying it is that she's so pretty, which, again, just brings me back to this whole thing of, like, I don't want to say, like, slut shaming, but this girl goes out with lots of guys. She meets people. She's so pretty. Their conversation is basically interrupted by Hugh speeding up, dropping her off in the road, just basically dispensing her and driving off. And she can barely walk back to the house.
And that's, like, traumatic for them. Like, if I'm, like, sitting on the porch and I see you come home that way,
right?
That is terrifying.
Yeah. The police come, and the house across the street watches from inside, and it's Greg, who we meet later, and some other person, and that other person says, like, these people are such a mess, so they're, like, they're the house to watch.
Yeah, but, like, as they're staring out the window, there are, like, so many neighbors, like, standing around, like, making a circle around the ambulance, and, like, what is the deal with that? I hate that.
What's the deal with that?
No, but seriously, like... I never understood that thing where, like, everyone just goes outside. Like, Dane Cook has that bit about
I was
Get your
just going to
shoes.
say,
Yeah.
I'm washing a dish, and I heard it, so I came out.
Yeah, exactly.
Fuck shoes.
Yeah, but, like, seriously, don't you watch quietly from the window?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
that's
exactly
what everyone
I do.
does.
I would never go outside.
Who are these people?
I'm never just dressed to go outside when I'm in my house anyway.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is, like, this trope exists of people doing that, but, like, do we actually know people that do that?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Jody explains things to the cop, who doesn't really seem receptive or warm, and, like, we don't even see his face. So I think that's just to, like, push on the fact that, like, this cop's like, okay, girl, whatever. Next, she's in the hospital looking very detached. The police are... So there's basically, like, a montage. She's in the hospital. The police are on the scene. They find the wheelchair.
They're just kind of, like, poking around.
Yeah.
Like, later on, they try to find Hugh, and in, like, 5 minutes, they do more than, like, these 4 police officers
Yeah,
did
exactly.
this entire time.
She's in bed. She's not eating. Mom and another woman are talking about it and saying that he had used a fake name to rent an apartment. Then later, she's in the bathroom, and she's looking at her body and, like, panting, like she's going to have a panic attack or something. Something is thrown at the window, and I fully jumped. But it's a red ball, and when she looks out, she just goes back to the mirror. And then as she sips from the sink, there's a boy standing on the roof and peering in. I think this was basically, like, to bring things together, and is the introduction to the question of, is that it that you now have in your brain for the rest of the movie? Like, is it being the thing that's following?
But this is just that creepy perverted kid from
Well,
next door.
exactly. Yeah. So it's bringing back from the beginning when we saw those kids peering at her through the fence, and it was harmless, and she smirked at them, and it was like, whatever. But now, moving forward, it's never harmless. She's in class. The professor is reading something about, I don't know if she's reading from the Bible or what, but it's about Lazarus, who is a character in the Bible brought back to life by Jesus. For those of you who don't know, I had to Google it. But I knew, what, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I just can't believe you had to Google that.
I only got my first communion and then never looked at Jesus again.
Well, no, but, like, Lazarus is, like, it's become, like, a pop culture thing.
No,
like,
I knew vaguely. I was like, I think this has something to do with, like, coming back from the dead, but I wanted to confirm.
In, like, Batman, Ra's al Ghul dies, and they throw him in the Lazarus pit. He comes back to life. Yeah.
Well, Jay is not paying attention and is instead peering out the window, and there's lots of, like, average college things happening on the lawn, and then also someone is approaching in the distance. At first, she kind of doesn't notice, but then she realizes that this person is just walking and also doesn't belong here because it's an old woman in, like, a nightgown and socks and slippers. Now, when her mom and the woman were talking in, like, the scene earlier, that ended with the camera panning up close to pictures on the wall, one of which definitely had an old woman in it who was like grandma. So I'm like, okay, this is grandma. This, because Hugh told her this is people that she might know. It might also not be people she knows. So, but she doesn't appear to recognize this woman at all. She just knows that it's coming for her. So she like gathers her things and basically just leaves class. And Greg is in her class and like has noticed. He noticed when she kind of started getting nervous and then watched her walk out. She goes down the hall and she's looking around, and then grandma's behind her. By the way, I do not like how these people walk. So they walk not fast. There's definitely like a slow zombie-like pace to them, but not a unknowing walk. Like they know what they're walking toward.
They walk deliberately.
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah. Deliberate.
But the funny thing too is they'll also walk according to the form that they're in. So like the first form that Jay sees is that naked woman the night that Hugh gives it to her.
Yeah.
And she's just like walking like a normal person. Mm-hmm. Grandma here is shuffling. She's definitely slower, definitely a lot slower because of the form she's taking. So I do find that fun. Because like, why would you choose the slower form? Right. You know, it's like a game. Like, okay, is this form is slower, but will it get me more likely to get closer because it seems less threatening? So that makes you think, how smart is this thing?
Oh my God, yeah. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
So she manages to ditch it by leaving campus. We just heard the rules from Hugh, but now I'm kind of, at least when I was watching it, was questioning everything. I'm like, I don't understand the rules. I assumed this thing was a ghost, but I also assumed this thing was grandma, but it's not. But if it's not, then why was the teacher talking about Lazarus coming back from the dead? Like, what's the point? What's the parallel there? Why?
It doesn't have to have a point,
I guess. But the good thing about it not being a ghost is that it has to follow like human rules. So it has to go through doors or opening spaces. So with it being at a school, everything's unlocked. So it's easy to get at a person in a public space.
It's easier, but there's also likely to be many more exits, much more open in a public space.
Yes.
Whereas at home, yes, you can lock that door, but as we'll see later, it can, bust it. Mm-hmm. So you got to play that balancing game of how safe do you want to be, and are you safer here now, but maybe safer there later?
Right. She goes to where her sister and Paul work and shares like what just happened to her and also what Hugh told her. Paul offers to spend the night, but they both say no, like in unison, and that's because he's just so into Jay. And then Jay's like, okay, fine, maybe the couch. And he assures her that he'll stay up all night and nothing weird will happen. Well, thanks, Paul, because something weird will definitely happen now. And it's your fault.
I think what Paul meant was like he won't try to kiss her or something. That's how I took it, honestly.
Not at all for me. That night,
I will say during that scene though, you were typing furiously. Like I don't know if you were just trying to go fast or like, but it seemed like something was very important to you in that moment. Just clack, 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 clack.
Well, I think it was the whole grandma thing because now she's talking like she didn't acknowledge that it was her grandma. So I'm like, who was this person? Why did we see the zoom in of this old woman? And then see this old woman walking with the theme of Lazarus happening if it's not grandma.
So I will say, I didn't mention it when you first talked about it because I never noticed grandma in those pictures. Like I never noticed a grandmother in those pictures because what I saw was dad. They showed their dad in that picture and it was them, but they were kind of younger.
Yeah.
So I took that to mean like dad's not around anymore because they're younger. And then later in the movie, I don't know if, I think Jay never outright says it, but it takes the form of her dad when they're at the pool. And I think like that's implied, but that you're sure if you see that photo of dad on the wall.
I did know that. So I must have taken in that was like the image of her dad, but like not acknowledged it. That night, Jay can't sleep. And so she joins Paul on the couch. By the way, apparently her mom is just fully zonked out from wine that I missed.
Yeah, so earlier when her mom is having that conversation with her friend, you see her open a bottle and pour into her coffee. And then right before this, they pan past her bedroom and you just see her mom's feet hanging off the bed, shoes still on, and you see a bottle of wine and a mostly empty glass on her dresser there. So, those two things combined with earlier, Greg's family saying this family's a mess, and then the picture of Dad, who with them as younger, you kind of get that whole picture. You get Dad's not around anymore, Mom's an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And then Jay's on medication for something, which, certainly we don't judge, but that would contribute to the neighborhood gossip cycle,
right.
So it just, all these little details just kind of form that picture, and you kind of have to put it together.
I don't know, because I didn't write specifically in my notes what it was, but this was when I realized what was happening at the beginning. I was like, oh, that girl from the beginning who died was being followed by it. And the reason why she walked the way she did in that circle was because it was there, but we weren't seeing it.
That was when you put it
together?
together?
Yeah, I don't know why.
That's pretty late.
No, it's just I stopped thinking about it. And then I...
Well, I know why.
Why?
The edibles.
Oh, yeah. I took an edible before. I just love that scene. Like, that scene in the beginning sticks with me because it's not scary to think about, so I'm okay with it sticking with me. But I love how she just walked around something that wasn't there. And as a watcher for the first time, I was like, what is she doing? And I'm also thinking some kind of like rape has just happened to her because of the way that she looks, but she's saying she's okay. So it's all just very confusing. It's just a very interesting scene.
One more little detail here on this scene.
Yeah.
Paul is watching TV, but it is a little tube TV that is situated on top of a much larger tube TV. It's presumably broken.
And they're both from the 50s.
Yeah.
So they chat about their youth and how he hasn't slept over in forever and that they were each other's first kiss. But they're interrupted by the sound of breaking glass.
Before we get to that, Paul as a character in this movie, he is a puppy dog for Jay.
Yeah.
Almost I would say today they would write that character a little differently because Paul almost gives off like incel vibes a little bit at certain points.
Yes.
Like just not really knowing how to act and, I don't want to say feeling entitled, but kind of having these expectations.
Yeah.
And Paul as a person is not the greatest in this movie. But again, like it's not that bad, but I feel like with today in a post Me Too world, he's written a little differently.
Yeah, something he says later, which we'll get to. I was like, are you kidding me? But we'll get to it. She can never be at rest. Jay can never be at rest now because she's just having this kind of inconsequential moment. She's just talking with her friend, and it's no longer inconsequential anymore because there's always something lurking behind her, and she doesn't know if it's coming now or coming later. The movie does a really good job of building that pressure on viewers, I feel like. Because right now we're just kind of starting to feel it.
It's really good hearing you appreciate this because as the scene was unfolding while we were watching it, you said, and I quote, "This is my least favorite part of our podcast," meaning watching the movie.
Yes, because I knew this was going to be what happens next, which is he leaves her to go get the friends. Or no, sorry, he goes to inspect. She makes him go inspect what the sound is, even though if he's not going to see it.
But also at this point, I feel like Jay she's not 100% on board with believing it. Because she was still kind of creeped out, like, because she was describing this thing as an old woman. She wasn't describing it as, the sex demon chasing her around. Right. So I think that doesn't really cross her mind that Paul can't see it, because in her head, she's maybe still trying to repress what happened with Hugh. Yeah, exactly.
So he reports back that, like, there's a broken window in the kitchen, but no one was there. And then he goes up to get Kelly and Yara. But she can't just sit there, which this is like my least favorite part. She can't just sit there. She has to like go inspect herself. So she gets up and starts looking around and eventually comes across it. And how it is appearing now is as like a beat up girl, topless and just peeing on herself. I hate it. Hate it on so many levels. And this was just unnecessary.
Yeah, it's gross. And I mean, I wouldn't say unnecessary. The point is to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah. We don't always have to be made uncomfortable by topless girls. How about that?
I feel like you're constantly applying this theme of sexism to this movie that is not there.
I'm just saying what I felt. And it's just like a man on International Women's Day to tell me that I'm not feeling the sexism that exists. Wow. Wow.
Okay.
That's the right answer. Okay, so she screams and runs upstairs and she hides in a bedroom. There's a knock on the door, but it's just Paul and Kelly. So she like lets them in and she tells them that it's here. And they try to calm her down. They're like, what are you talking about? And then there's another knock. And they call out to it like, who is there? And there's no answer. And then it knocks again and it's just Yara, who could have just simply answered the first time she knocked. As they let her in, it comes in behind her and now it's like a very tall man.
Yeah, and the tall man is maybe my favorite monster, and I don't know why. He's just creepy and unexpected.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, oh, well, it's Yara, it's fine, we'll see it coming down the hall. But this tall man, and when we say tall, we mean like 8 feet.
Yeah,
like
very
he like
tall.
ducks under the door frame and steps just past Yara into the room, and it's very sudden and not really a jump scare, but it's just a really good scene for me.
She ends up escaping like out the window and she gets away on a bike. And the neighbor kid, Greg, watches from inside the car. He's like in his car with a date and he just watches her like bike away with haste. She gets to a park and stops, catches her breath.
Brianna, quote, "Oh yeah, that place is not scary, an empty fucking park," end quote. I would argue with the knowledge that you now have, wouldn't you agree that that's maybe a perfect location right now?
No, wide open spaces are not okay to me. I don't like it.
But with this thing, a wide open space is the best possible space.
At this time, I didn't understand that it doesn't simply appear.
And that's why I said with what you know now.
Oh. Yes.
Just because it's International Women's Day doesn't mean you don't have to listen when I speak.
Okay, so she sits on like a swing and she's just kind of looking around. And also, there's a lot of her looking around in this movie. At the beginning, when she's in the pool, she's floating, she's looking up, she's hearing the birds, she's watching the trees, and it's all very nice. But now she's always having to look around and it's suffering, it's torture, it's panic. So again, it's just one of those, I don't know, do we call it parallels or something, where she sees it one way, everything is good, and now we see when she does the same thing, it's not quite the same anymore. Just as she starts to relax, she hears something, but it's just her friends. As she's hugging her sister, she sees someone coming up from the road. He's walking pretty fast, though, so I'm like, it's okay. They're walking too fast. And it is okay. It's just Greg who's like, what the fuck is going on? Tell me now. She says that she needs to find Hugh, and he just, like, offers his car immediately. Like, he's just part of the crew now. He's part of the Scooby Gang.
Yeah, and you know what? I love that because he is, and he's not at all creepy or aggressive in a way that you might expect, like, that role to be in a typical movie. Like, that bad boy across the street with a nice car and a leather jacket is going to be kind of a dick.
Yeah.
But he's just a nice boy, and he's just helping out.
Yeah, and, like, he's been around the whole time kind of observing, and he's never made a negative face, or like the other person in his house made that comment and he didn't say anything. So he's always just been kind of like, what the hell is going on here? They drive for what seems like a while, and I don't really get how they know where he lives.
And this is my first thing. As they drive past countless empty, overgrown lots and abandoned factories, you just have to assume this is Detroit.
Yeah.
So no, earlier in the movie, the police said there was an address that Jay had where, I don't know if she picked him up from there or something, but there was an address that Jay had.
Oh.
And the cops had made a comment like, we went there and it's an abandoned house. So they went there because that was the only lead they had.
Got it. So yeah, they stop at this like dilapidated house, and it's clear that no one lives there now.
This house, again, I'm just reading a note that I wrote while we were watching it. This house just confirms for me that they're in Detroit.
Enough. The Detroit fans have stopped listening. On the windows are strings with cans, and now I didn't get what this was at the time, but having thought of it over time, I realized that those are alarms, so that if something comes in, it makes noise. Did you know that?
Yes.
Shut up. They separate and explore the house. Get a clear shot of Greg finally. He looks 15 at this point. I wrote he's probably 21, but in general it's hard to tell the age of anyone in this film. Paul finds a Playboy with a bunch of tissues. ew.
Yeah, I was a little concerned by that because it was like right next to the bed, and I get it. Like, it's an abandoned house, like you don't have to clean up after yourself. But like, if I'm leaving a pile of cum tissue somewhere, it's not going to be right next to where I sleep.
Oh my God.
Just saying.
Well, and also he just like sits on a mattress and starts looking at it, and Jay is like right there. It's just a weird choice. There's just weird sexuality choices in this movie. Jay is in the same room, peering out a window, and she sees someone walking. I don't think it's bad, though, because they're walking by, like they're not facing the house. But that's how you watch this the whole time, where every person, even people they don't see, you're like, is that it? Is that it? Which is it's almost like interactive.
Yeah, basically any scene that has any sort of background, you're looking for it the whole time. Yeah, and I'm sure that's by design. Yeah. Just one more thing on like the cum tissues before we move on.
Yeah, sure.
Do you ever think he got like interrupted? Like he was like masturbating and then like the can alarms went off and he was like, oh my God. And then had to just like run?
Probably. Just, the odds.
Yeah.
They find a picture of Hugh with a girl from high school, so they go there to like get his name basically. So that's the next scene. They're going to the high school. The next scene is this like very interesting shot. We watch Greg and Jay. It is Greg, right? It's not Paul. Okay. Go down the hallway of the high school into the office to like go talk and get information.
And as they show that, they scan past a window.
Yes.
And you do get a few glimpses of somebody walking towards the window.
Right. So that's what I was saying. Like this shot is like a circle, basically, of we follow them and it pans around and you're just kind of looking at a high school. Everything's normal, kids walking around, whatever. To outside, you see more people, but then this one person walking alone, young, so it doesn't seem out of place, but like they're walking towards the building. So you're like, is that it? And then we keep panning through the same spot that we just were. We see them in the office now, and they're just having a conversation with someone to get information about Hugh. So they don't know what we know, which is as we pan again, we see that person getting closer. This scene is discussed in an AV Club article that I read, and I'll talk a little bit more about later, like other things that I found in that article. But this is where it like really, for me at least, pulls viewers fully into like the experience of this film.
Yeah, and not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I will say it adds another layer because right after this scene, you see somebody walking towards the camera. And then in the scene right after this, you see somebody walking towards the camera. But that person ends up just being a normal person. Yeah. It's kind of like a fake out. And I feel like that really just reinforces what you were saying earlier, where it's just you never know.
Right.
Like, it can seem sinister, but it could be totally innocent. But the other way around, too. It could seem innocent, and you could get your reed bent the wrong direction.
Constantly, you're like, is it coming or not? And in fact, we're even less comfortable than Jay, who is currently unaware that I'm going to say that is it. Like, it was there. Because when they do exit, and they exit without an issue, they get to the car, they report what they found, which is that they got his name and address, and someone is walking towards the car. And there's no reason for anybody to be walking towards the car. And as they drive away, it continues to follow, and they never see it. They go to Hugh's mother's house, and he actually speaks to them, which I wasn't expecting. I thought there would be a whole scene of him, like, running away, basically. He says he still sees it, which I don't know if I believe. And he tells her that she just needs to pass it on. He says he got it from a one-night stand.
I will say he can still see it.
No, but I think the rules are so Jay sees it later, and I think that's only because she's around where it's going to be. He's not around where it is.
Right. I don't think he means he sees it right then. I think he just means he is still able to see it.
But why would he see it if he's never been near Jay?
I don't think he's saying that he's actively seeing it. I think when he says I still see it, I think he just means like I'm still capable of seeing it.
But how does he know?
Because that night in the factory, he was able to see it.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't trust him, Phyllis.
Oh, no, I don't trust Date Rape Rob Thomas either, but he's been very sensible about this whole thing. Like you said, like you were surprised that he...
Yeah.
And it just plays into that thing where he's just like, he's a master of this thing for whatever reason. He has studied this and he has made it his thing, his area of expertise.
Someone is walking toward them and she gets pretty close, and finally Hugh notices and asks, like, does everyone see her? And they do. So It's fine. And this is where I was kind of questioning, like, but does he know that? Does he know that that's just a regular person and he's just trying to, like, I thought he was trying to convince her, like, don't try to give it back to me because I still see it anyway, so there's no point. I don't know. They're driving again, and Kelly asks Jay if she'll pass it on. And everyone's kind of sleeping, but Paul's only pretending to sleep. And so he's listening. And Jay hasn't made a decision. I couldn't tell if he made like a face in the way he was listening. And I couldn't tell, is he wanting to sacrifice himself or is he like trying to hear what she decides to judge her character? We later learn what it is. Hugh had said if they get far enough away, it'll give her time to think. So they go to what I think is like Greg's family's lake house.
Yeah, he says it's his family's lake house.
The next morning, Greg gets a gun from the shed and they practice shooting. Jay's pretty good at it for some reason. And they have this whole conversation and he just says like, oh, I guess I should have been nicer to you. So they have some sort of history where he's a bully, I guess. Later, they're on the beach. It's pretty peaceful. From a bit away, there's someone walking up to them, but Greg gets up, goes off to pee. It's like, whatever.
Well, it's Yara.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not in a second.
Spoiler alert.
Because we constantly look, behind. Anytime we're looking at Jay, we're seeing what's behind her and something is coming. And Yara calls for them to come into the water. Kelly is encouraging her to go in. And as she's saying maybe later, her hair gets like pulled up, like someone touched her hair and just like pulled it up over her head.
But we don't see it at this point.
Right.
When they keep focusing back on Jay, you see Yara slowly walking up to them. And you see her every time they go back to Jay, but then they shoot to Yara in the water saying, hey guys, come on in. And then when they go back to Jay, then you don't see it anymore. So I think that was a very, like, you're supposed to think it's just Yara.
I wrote it was a
walking
girl
up.
in pajamas.
It was Yara in a one-piece bathing suit.
Okay. She gets away and Paul tries to fight it and like it throws a chair at him. So it can kind of like interact with things and it knows other people exist, but it's not.
It doesn't throw a chair at him. It throws him and then he picks up a chair and breaks it on the thing.
Oh, well, whatever. It interacts with him.
Yes.
It
throws Paul like way over. Meanwhile, Greg's just like in the bushes peeing like somewhere else. He's not even like there for this.
Right. They get away from it. They run into the shed, and then Jay goes out of the shed and, like, shoots it and actually does hit it. Meanwhile, Greg is now running back, and he thinks he's, like, being shot at, basically. So he, like, dodges the bullet. Something bangs in a piece of the door at the bottom, so they go back in, they shut the... So she shoots it. It goes down, but then it comes back up. So they know, okay, I can't just kill it now. So they go back in, shut the door, and something bangs in the bottom of the door. So it's not fully broken. Then Greg sticks his head in, and he's like, what the fuck? And then, I don't know, he just kind of runs away. She goes up to the broken door, and another it pokes its head in, basically. This was like a boy.
Yeah, it was a boy in like a bathing suit, like a 11-year-old.
Yeah. It comes in through the door, right? Like it comes into the shed.
Yes.
Yeah, and she eventually runs out through another door. She like slides open the door, runs out. She runs...
Yeah, because it's not a shed, it's like a boathouse.
Yeah.
So it's got that big door right on the other side that
Right.
slides open for you to push the boat out. So she ends up opening that and escaping out that way.
She runs all the way back to the car. They're like chasing after her, and Greg's like, what are you doing? And she just basically steals the car and drives away.
Don't blame her.
No.
Don't blame her at all.
But she's fully panicked, so she's not paying attention to what she's doing. She's looking over her shoulder, and she's speeding away. A pickup truck starts pulling out, and to avoid crashing into it, she crashes into a mailbox and into like a cornfield.
I love that beach scene because it's just silent. That whole scene, like leading up to Yara or the thing walking up behind them.
Yeah.
It's just a quiet, peaceful scene. And like, because you know what kind of movie you're watching, like, something's going to happen, but there are no contextual clues to tell you that something's about to happen until it does.
She wakes up in the hospital. Her friends are sleeping and she is just panicked. She starts hearing footsteps. Now, personally, I thought they were too quick right away. So I was like, it's probably fine. But she was very nervous. And this was a very tense scene of just listening to her breathe and watching her listen to the steps.
two little notes on the scene. The first is this is another kind of time warp moment because the nurse that eventually passes by, it's like a very old school nurse outfit.
Oh, yeah.
And she's wearing, the sound of her walking are heels,
Heels.
first of all, which nurses would never wear anymore.
Right.
On linoleum, which hospitals don't have anymore. But like, because like the tiling on the wall and what you can see of the floor, it's all very old school. So, I mean, maybe that's just what hospitals look like in Detroit. I don't know.
I'm sure not.
But it's another kind of like time warpy moment for me. And my other note on this is the hospital, I would argue, where Jay is right now is the absolute worst possible place for her to be.
Yes.
There are no easy exits.
Right.
It's just full of people and plenty of old people in gowns that could be shuffling toward you, you know? So the
yes.
hospital is the absolute last place I'd want to be right now.
Yeah, I was like so scared. It ends up being nothing, as we kind of said. My notes kind of jump around here at this point, but basically, I think that night or some point later, her and Greg have sex.
Yeah, just like every girl dreams it. Quietly at night in a hospital to get rid of a sex demon.
Yeah, heck yeah. And we see kind of this montage, like this inevitably brings them closer. Like they're talking a lot more, they're holding hands, and Paul is just looking on and hating this.
Yeah, I wrote here, Paul is going to kill them all no matter how this turns out.
Days pass, 3 days actually, and Greg has not seen it. She asks if he believes her, and he says he does. He just doesn't think it's following him. Back home, she tries to kind of go back to normal. She goes in the pool. She keeps her cast. She broke her arm, so she has her cast up out of the water. She stares at the gate and like zones out, and then she just gets out of the pool and goes inside. Out front, Greg comes up to the other three, and he wants to go in and check on her, but they kind of like don't let him go in. They say she doesn't want to come out. I don't know. It seemed like they were purposely not letting him in. As he leaves, one of them asks if he really hasn't seen anything. And he says, yeah, I haven't. And then Paul's like, well, something happened. And Greg says, basically like, yeah, but it's just not what she thinks. So he really doesn't believe her. He basically had sex with her just to relieve her and make her feel like, okay, it's fine now.
Yeah, he believes that she believes it. I don't think, he thinks she's making it up or anything, but has no regard for this thing at all.
And I think he like woke up in the hospital and saw her panic, if I'm remembering right. So I think he was just trying to like help her downward spiral.
Yeah.
She's up that night looking at the window, and there's nothing. And I'm just like, wow, the burden. Like she can't even just let it go now. In the way this works, it's off her shoulders, but she can't. She sees someone walking. It's Greg. To his house, he knocks on he doesn't knock. He tries to open the door, but he can't. So it breaks the window. So it's really not Greg. It's just walking in the form of Greg.
Yeah, when it first starts walking by, Jay like knocks on the window to try and get his or its attention, and it doesn't respond. And that's when she's like, oh God, no.
She ends up calling him, trying to call him, and he doesn't answer, so she has to go. Now, I don't know why she even bothered having sex with him if she was still going to be concerned that this was going to happen, because whatever. But she runs to the house. She crawls in through the window. She goes up the stairs, and it's now in another form, banging like incessantly on his door.
This form is Greg's mom.
Yeah. She calls out to it, and it notices, it looks at her, but it keeps pounding on the door.
Probably like, I'll come for you in a second, don't worry.
Yeah, until Greg opens it to see his mother topless, because why? Of course she's topless. And it just attacks him. Jay ends up seeing what happens, which is there's lots of like electrocution happening.
And the thing was like riding Greg. Like
yeah, it
he
was
weird.
weird.
Basically having sex with his mom here. It's
yeah.
pretty awful.
Yeah. And Greg's dead.
Yeah, and I will say, I feel like for Jay, this has to be such a huge moment because it's like she obviously believed it and knew it was real before this, but now she's seen it happen. And I feel like that just brings a whole new gravity to it, where it's just like, okay, before, like, it was this thing, and maybe there's that tiny little small part of your brain in the back that can say, it's all been a coincidence, but watching this thing kill Greg is just like, you can't even deny it anymore.
Yeah, and now she knows it's coming back for her. So there's the whole other layer of like, even if I have sex with someone, it's going to come back to me. She drives away and she wakes up outside on top of the car, which, why would you sleep out in the open? That's a bad choice. Sleeping out in the open?
Maybe. Obviously sleeping is going to leave you vulnerable, but if you're like stuck in the car and the thing is right there, you might be better off, again, like sort of like the park thing, where it's you might be better off just having all those exits because she could run in literally any direction. Whereas if it's outside the car, she has to get out of the car.
Well, no, she can just run it over with the car.
If it starts.
Yeah. She walks down a trail to the shore and she basically like finds some guys on a boat. She decides to swim out, I guess, to have sex with them.
Yeah, that's what's implied. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like if I'm just like hanging out on a boat and some girl with a cast swims to the boat from shore and tries to have sex with me and my 2 friends, I'm probably not going to do it. Just throwing that
Well,
out there.
to quote the Real Housewives of New Jersey from this season, they're just boat whores, so it's fine.
Whoa. All right.
The boat whores part is what they said. She gets home with like a wet cast. The house is a mess. The pool is broken from the outside. The wall of the pool is broken. The bread is moldy, so things are not going well at the household. Paul comes over and she says it's going to come sooner or later. Now, I don't know. Did she end up having sex with these guys? I guess.
I assume she did.
It seems like,
but
I don't know.
This whole thing also made me wonder, like, do you wonder if Hugh had sex with women before Jay and they all just kept getting killed? Like
Yeah.
that girl in the beginning, did Hugh give it to her?
Right. That's what I wonder. He offers himself and she says no.
Yeah, this is where I note that in 2020, Paul is 100% an incel. Like,
Right.
not the time, bro.
Because he then asks, why did you do it with Greg? Oh, I'm sorry. I chose not to have sex with you and leave you with the sex demon. Sorry, Paul. He tries to kiss her. Beautiful. And she says no. She gets up and she kind of just like looks around and he sees a picture of her in the pool and says, do you trust me? And so the 4 of them drive off. I guess they're going to where they had their first kiss. I think that's what they talked about earlier.
Yeah,
They
going
had
to
their
the
first
pool.
kiss by like a public pool.
Yeah, and, I will say, no, I don't trust Paul. But in his defense, this is a pretty good plan. It doesn't work out like they expected, but in general, it's really good for something that seems to have just come to him.
Yeah.
Give him a little credit. He redeems himself a little bit with it.
Yeah. Oh, and while they drive off, there's just a naked man on the roof.
Oh, yeah. Lots of full frontal nudity in this movie, and I am here for it.
I would argue no full frontal with this because it's just bush. There's nothing else there.
You know what? Some men are natural.
No.
And that's okay, Brianna.
It's just, I feel like that's what we get when we see male full frontal is just like hair, the end. I think you have to get an R rating. Did this have an R rating?
Of course it did.
Oh, okay. Anyway, they drive into like Detroit. They mention like 8 Mile and stuff like that. And that's when I realized this was Detroit and all of the bodies of water were just a lake and not an ocean.
Yeah, I like to imagine it's like a shared universe with 8 Mile. Like B-Rabbit
Yeah.
is like around here somewhere.
He's just like rapping somewhere.
Also, I feel like as Jay like sees this thing and realizes it's back after her, is that her realizing that 3 guys on the boat are dead already? And did she have sex with all 3 of them?
It just, no.
Just one of them?
No. Why would she have sex with all 3?
That's true. That's actually a really good point.
Right.
Yeah. Well, one of them's dead anyway.
Exactly. They go into this like indoor public pool and they basically set up a bunch of stuff around the edge of the pool. It's like old ass items, old hairdryer, old TV, radio, a lamp, like all this electrical stuff.
Yeah, and it's all plugged in against the wall. And, I think their plan is to get this thing in the water and then push the things in to electrocute it.
Right. She gets into the pool and they're kind of waiting for it to come. Now, I don't get why she went into the pool. I know it was to make it go into the pool, but how does she not get electrocuted?
Well, I think the original plan is for her to get out of the pool. Basically, she hangs out because they know it has to come in through that door. They know it has to come in through that one entrance. And so she hangs out on the other end of the pool. The plan is it gets in the pool at that end. She gets out. They kick all the electronics in.
Okay. Eventually, it does come. So they wait. Imagine, like, if they had to wait a long time, though, and, like, you're the guy who opens up the pool first thing the next morning, and you just come across this scene with, like, all this electrical equipment and this girl in the pool, and her friends just, like, looking on. What a show.
It'd be a good story.
She sees it. She alerts them to it, but we don't see it. So now we're kind of watching this for a little bit from the perspective of her friends. Like, we don't get to see it. They ask her what it's showing as, and she says she doesn't want to say. My assumption was that it was going to be so bloody and grotesque that it was going to be horrible to look at. So I was really afraid to see. But it starts throwing the stuff at her that's like that they've lined up on the edges. And she has to go underwater to dodge getting hit by it, which is so disorienting. Like every time she comes up, it's like, okay, where am I?
Yeah, and lucky for her, as these things are getting thrown, they're being unplugged because he's not just putting them in the edge, he's throwing them directly at her. So they're being unplugged.
That's why
so she's
okay.
Yeah, that's why she's not getting electrocuted there.
Got it. This was like a panicky moment. I love going underwater. Like I find it hard to be in a pool or any kind of body of water without going under. I have to. But you have to go straight under and come right back up, and then you're fine. But if you go under and like move your body around, when you come up, you have no idea where you're looking. The whole world could have changed in that moment. And never mind having to come up and continue to dodge like a giant television.
TV being thrown at your head. Yeah.
From the 50s. So it's not like a thin TV. Eventually, it's her dad. We see who it is. It's her dad. I wrote, I think we determined that it is her dad. And I guess that was just from the photo that we saw.
Yeah, and that would also make sense why she wouldn't want to say, because she wouldn't want to traumatize her sister.
Right. Again, this was just kind of random, though. Like, this random, is her dad dead? Did he just abandon them? Like, it ends up being inconsequential. It's not this big momentous moment. They never talk about it. They never say how hard it was to see that for her or anything. It's just, yeah, that's her dad. Paul ends up shooting it, which is pretty impressive because he can't see it. He does at some point also shoot Yara. She ends up being okay, though. He shoots at it again, and it falls in the pool.
Yara takes like a blanket and throws it at the thing, and it
Yeah.
goes over its head, and then Paul's able to pop it.
Yeah, but he does shoot it once without seeing it.
Oh, okay.
That's how he shoots Yara. So yeah, they cover it with a blanket, which makes it take form, and then he shoots it again. It falls into the pool now, so now Jay is trying to get out of the pool. But it pulls her down. So now she's struggling with it underwater. And Paul still manages to shoot it again. I mean, what a marksman.
Yeah, so basically it's got its hand around Jay's ankle and it's pulling her down.
Yeah.
So I think Paul just kind of sees her leg being yanked and just like takes his best shot. You were yelling at the TV, "Don't shoot, bro." That's what you said. "Don't try to shoot, bro." Those were your exact words.
Honestly.
But here's my question. Yes, shooting was a bad idea, but if he doesn't shoot, what happens? She dies anyway.
I guess.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's not the worst case scenario if he just puts a bullet in her brain and it just ends.
Yikes.
Right?
Jay gets out of the water and like catches her breath, and then she crawls towards the pool. And I was really anxious. I hate approaching things because I know it's going to jump out, so I kind of didn't watch. But I think basically nothing happens, and the pool is just filled with blood.
Yeah, it's like, but it's not just like blood, like it's just like a lot of like thick red, like almost like rolling fog. Yeah, exactly. So it is kind of like this sign that like if you see that, you can think, okay, it's dead, because it's not just blood.
Yeah, and it's not coming out, and it's lasting, like they've shot it multiple times. It comes right back up. So they know that it's taking longer, so we must have done it.
More to your point earlier, though, there is no such thing as a happy ending in this scenario, though, because like it's not like there's a handbook for this. Like they don't, like, yeah, sure, like he's dead, but is he? There's no possible way to know.
Right.
Any stranger in a crowd, like you're just going to be terrified for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
God forbid you meet a slow walking mute person.
Right.
You're probably going to kill them and go to jail for murder.
Yeah.
And then it's going to come get you in your cell.
In jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they leave, and again, like montage-y, I think later her and Paul have sex, right?
Yes. Yeah. Paul's reward for a job well done is what I wrote.
Yes. He asks her if she feels different. She says no, and he says he doesn't feel different either. Then there's Paul like driving around finding prostitutes, because now I guess if it still exists, she's passed it on to him, so now he has to pass it on.
And that's pretty smart.
Sex worker is probably the best way to go here.
I agree, and I do wonder why Hugh didn't do that or think of that. But that said, I guess maybe, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, he probably did. Like, let's be honest. It has to be passed on and then on and then on and then on. Like, it will just always come back.
Yeah. But I mean, well, that's why a sex worker is a good choice, though, because odds are she'll pass it on maybe that same day.
Right. But then if people don't know the rules, they just get killed.
Yeah, that's true.
So you always have to be like, oh, I just had sex with you. Here's all these rules, which is why he was so like, here's all the rules because I don't want to get fucked again.
Yeah, that's true. I guess if it's a bunch of unwitting people, it'll probably make short order of them.
Exactly.
Yeah, good point.
Oh, trust me, I've thought of all the points here. They visit Yara in the hospital, and I don't know what she's like talking about, some story she's reading from her seashell cell phone.
It's The Idiot by Dostoevsky.
Oh.
Which I'm not super familiar with, but I looked up a bit and I honestly couldn't find much relevance. Like, I don't think it has any deeper meaning or anything.
Later, they walk down a sidewalk, hand in hand. Someone is walking behind them, alone. They don't see it. And the last shot is just us as viewers watching them from behind. Fiend.
Yeah, it's like literally like ripped from the Sopranos finale, including the dramatic like cut to black.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the assumption is, but is it? We'll never know.
Yep, exactly.
So we don't have a review, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the AV Club article that I read. To quote the article, it said, naysayers like to point out all the holes in Mitchell's logic, like what happens if the target crosses the ocean. You could just keep moving around a lot, theoretically, and be quite safe. But just the knowledge that something is heading right for you, however slowly, is deeply unnerving.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that's a hole at all. I think that's just part of it.
Well, no, there is that hole. That's the first thing I thought of was like, okay, well, what if I just go on a plane and cross the ocean? Like, is it still coming? Is it going to walk across the bottom of the floor a la Pirates of the Caribbean?
That's what I assumed, yeah. I mean, maybe that's just because my familiarity with the snail meme,
Yeah.
because that's how the snail works. But
Right.
that's what I assume. I assume it can just walk anywhere. It doesn't need to breathe or eat or anything. So it's just going to walk into the ocean and just walk across. Yeah, it's going to take a while, but that was a given for me. But maybe, this is a pre-snail world, so...
They also said, you can never let your guard down. Eternal vigilance. It's always coming, even when you're not thinking about it at all. That's the true horror.
Absolutely is.
And that is just that's just to sum up the takeaway from this film is it is always there.
It follows?
What is your jump score?
My jump score, I only give it a 5. It doesn't have a lot of jump scares, this movie. It's very tense overall. Like, it feels like there's going to be a jump scare all the time. And there just aren't nearly as many as you expect. But that's actually kind of... It makes it good. Like, it makes it work. So, yeah, only a 5. There are a couple jumps, but nothing crazy.
I gave it a 6. This probably even a little too high if I compare it to like last week or last episode, which was just a 55-minute long jump scare. It's tense, like you said, but it doesn't have those moments. What about the nightlight factor?
I gave it a 9. The beauty of this creature and what it does is that there is a little bit of everything for everyone here. You've got the extremely gory, like that opening kill. You've got things that make you uncomfortable, like the urination in the kitchen, or, just things that are weird, like the tall man. Whatever it is that scares you, there's a little something here in this movie that's going to stick with you. So I appreciate that. So it's a 9 for me.
I gave it an 8. And your horror buff score?
9 out of 10. I honestly, going into this movie, I would have said 10, but we've been on a run of really good movies lately, and it's just put this one in a slightly different perspective for me. It doesn't quite live up to the standards of, say, Host, but full points for originality. And I still maintain that the soundtrack is probably the best horror movie soundtrack I've heard, or one of the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very effective. Oh, and I wrote somewhere in my headers here who it was. Disaster Piece. That's who did the score.
Well, whoever Disaster Piece is, they did a great job.
My Scaredy Cat score was an 8. For the night of, I was very scared, but not so much later. I originally had the score a little lower, but really what bumped it up was just the idea of, just as I thought about it more, the fact that it will never stop. The idea of you keep going. You could have sex with someone and they could pass it on, they could pass it on, and they could pass it on. And it doesn't even matter. It could get passed on to 200 people and it still might come back to you. And then my neophyte score was a 7. Only because, I don't know, it just wasn't as good as what we saw last week, for example. And the undertones for me was a little uncomfortable. So the undertones that apparently only exist for me.
Well, yeah, I do just want to apologize for that. I guess I could have said it differently. I'm not trying to gaslight you or anything.
On International Women's Day. You gaslight me.
But like I said, I think our views on this are different because I view it through the lens of a horror fan that is just such a well-known trope in horror movies that it's just kind of a given.
Yeah, and we haven't watched any of those early slashers yet. So.
Yeah. It's I think that's, but I mean, to just a little point, when we watch Scream, I'm pretty sure that's one of the things Randy says. Like, that's the whole point of Scream is when you're a virgin, you're safe, and then as soon as you have sex, you're fair game.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to apologize for the way I said that. If anybody who was listening was offended and is still listening, I apologize.
I forgive you. That is the blessing on International Women's Day. Okay, what are we watching for our next episode?
We are taking a little bit of a break from the scary stuff. We are watching Shaun of the Dead next because Brianna has to take a short trip for work without me and doesn't want to watch anything too scary while she has to sleep in a scary hotel room alone.
Yes, facts.
So I'm excited. It's a hilarious movie. Haven't seen it in a while. And I think, that whole the Cornetto trilogy, we might work the rest of them in for palate cleansers over the course of the podcast because this is the start of a really good trilogy. So I'm excited to watch it again.
Goody. Okay. Well, thanks for listening to Go a Little Mad. Remember to follow or subscribe to us on your favorite pod platform. Like us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Go a Little Mad. And share us with everyone you know and give us a 5-star rating and review. It makes all the difference. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.